Way too big on the bat.
Oh, man. Episode 136, This Life in Tech. We're actually live. That was fast. I'm Jason.
The bad guy is back. Dan.
And I'm still TK.
Hey, so Jason, did you ever figure out whether or not the high score or the low score wins at golf?
High score, man. I mean, isn't it like every other sport?
I laughed so much the camera fell.
I don't think Ken said anything about that, did he?
No, but he was he definitely was kind of a little salty there when I said he tore his rotator cuff doing dips.
Man, I don't know what he did to be out 8 months from a golf swing.
I have no idea, but
poor guy, just as he was really getting into it too, man.
Yeah, he was playing a lot more tournaments than what he used to. I mean, he was definitely playing a lot more. So it sucks when all of a sudden he has something. Because now 8, he'll go, if it was his rotator cuff, which I have no idea if it was, just something in his shoulder, being out for that long, and if he winds up having to have like surgery or something like that, I mean, his golf swing will be completely different.
Yeah.
I mean, it took Tiger 6 years to get back to reasonable form after a knee surgery and a couple of back surgeries.
And I was serious when I told you, when I was in high school, I partially tore one of the rotator cuffs. And it was so bad, and I didn't want to give up powerlifting for a long period of time. This is when I learned to, most people bench straight grip. I bench reverse grip. Because when you turn your arms, it puts a different focus on the deltoid head. And to this day, that's how I bench press because of that injury.
Should have gotten the surgery.
Yeah, pretty much. But I just choose not to get injured like that. So,
well, it's easy when you don't do shit.
I just play golf.
Only way you're going to hurt your rotator cuff is if you accidentally start dropping a bottle of whiskey and have to.
I know.
Really quick.
If I drop my bottle of whiskey, it's going to be a bad day.
Yeah.
I know.
Dude, it's finally cooling off here. I don't know about what it's like for you guys. This is kind of nice, though, because we have like the South, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast between the three of us.
Well, I'm glad I'm back in humidity and sanity outside of South Bend, Indiana, which is I tell people now that when I've moved, they'll ask, why did you go to Indiana? I said, well, I had to go, and I was, as every great dictator winds up having gone through, they get exiled at some point. So that was where I had to get exiled so I could rebuild back up my power base, and then so that after I exile in South Bend is now I'm gonna take on New York.
We figured South Bend was the only place you'll learn how to spell delusional.
Yeah.
Hey, TK, do you get a sense that this is like stored up 2 weeks worth of bullshit?
Yeah, it is. Actually, probably more than that, because he was going to be on one day and then blew us off. So it's been almost a month since he's been out there. And then the last time there was 4 of us, so he didn't feel he had his appropriate amount of time in the forum, so to speak. But Dan, I'll let you know, we talked about this off air last week that we knew that when you came back, this is what was going to happen. So
it has nothing to do with how often. I mean, I do this every week.
Yeah. It's just now you're feeling especially randy about the whole process.
Oh, man. So what's it like being the new guy, man?
Well, for me, it's nothing different, right? I mean, I've never had a job longer than 3 years, 3 months. I'm good at startups and reorganizing, particular, my department, getting them functional. Not that to say that, the last, when I was at Fixmo and Silent Circle, I mean, it was fun. I would have probably been there much longer, either one of those longer than 3 years. Fixmo, we sold. Silent Circle had a bunch of, FUBARD we'll say initiatives. Like, I can't think of a better term. So for me, being the new guy, it's, I'm used to it. So I can't say that it's anything I'm not used to. The thing that I tell everyone, and there's a reason why, there's tons of books and research around, the first 90 days, your first year, things like that. And not that you should take any of them specifically to heart and follow it as a blueprint. You have to take it and make it your own. But the part for me, which was always the same, the first 60 days, I just observe. I do very little in making big statements, trying to push an agenda or anything along those lines until you can see what the political structure really is, who does what, and more importantly, who isn't doing what you need. Because that's probably the most important part is there are people who talk and there are people who do. And you need to figure out which in the organization you are. Hopefully you're one of the ones that do, but you need to find out which in your organization are people who just talk and aren't doing.
Yeah, well, tell me what you think about this, TK, because as a new guy, I feel like I'm at a point, and I think this is what you're describing, Dan, where like I don't really worry about being able to do what I need to do to be successful in the role I'm in. I mean, even though I'm talking about being in academia, which is the structures in this case is very different, right? I mean, I have to show up day one and teach a class, so there's no just sitting back and observing that. Like my biggest concerns are where the service is at. Like where's the library? Where's the shower at that I'm going to use when I work out? Like how do I get to my classroom? Where's my office at? It's like the logistical stuff that is really the only thing that I ever really, I guess, think about is a fair way to describe it. Teaching a class is teaching a class. I've been fortunate to be with a good group of people now. And I mean, I've had all summer to prepare because I knew what my classes were ahead of time. I've been going to campus a couple times a week and hanging out with people and getting a feel for the politics and so forth. So I don't know. I still feel like the new guy. It's definitely a new environment. I'm going to run a social experiment for the first 16 weeks. Check this out. Tell me what you guys think about this, right? So as you know, I tend to be a little outside the group, just naturally.
Really?
Yeah. And so I've decided that anything I think I'm going to do other than teaching a class and research, so how I integrate with groups, how I interact with people, stuff like that, whatever I think I'm going to do, I'm going to do the exact opposite. And I'm going to do that for 16 weeks and see what the result is.
Well, it'll probably be amazing.
Both of you guys just setting them up on the tee this morning. Dan, let me ask you the question this way. So, like you said, you've never been anywhere more than 3 years and 3 months. And when you're the new guy, I think being the new guy is different depending on the level of the organization you enter at.
Oh, absolutely it is.
Right? And so if you're saying I'm going to enter the organization in the C-suite, or I'm going to enter the organization and let's just go back and look at SiriusXM, right? Where did you enter the organization there?
I heard like a whole bunch of, it sounded like a radar going off, so I barely heard anything you said. Well, Jason all of a sudden sat down, and all of a sudden there was like a radar going off.
That must have been the hydraulics on my desk. Sorry about that.
Oh,
nice. So when we agree that it can be a much different experience depending on where you enter the organization, whether it's your first job out of college or you enter at the C-suite. But I think you probably go back far enough when you entered the organization in Sirius XM as opposed to where you're entering it today. What do you feel intrinsically in you is the big difference?
Well, I will say for the most, probably, while you two both know a lot of my bravado is just, for me joking around, and a lot of it is.
Okay.
But, I always, and this is probably what has always driven me in order to be better, is I suffer from imposter syndrome. I never have felt, even when at XM, all of a sudden I'm coming in as the senior network engineer and I have to design this infrastructure. I was 25 years old, and everyone around me was like your age, TK. I mean, they
weren't that old. They weren't that old.
they were all in their late 40s and 50s, and even some early 60s, and they had all these accolades behind them, and I'm like, how did I get picked? To be the person to do this. And I've never always truly felt that I was good enough. So that always drove me to be even better and better and better. They say, like when you take a look at, great athletes, things of that nature, Michael Jordan, they try to look for something to get them motivated in order to go out there and do more. Well, I didn't need an external motivation, because to me, I talk to motivate myself, because if I say it, then I better be able to back it up.
Right. It's about actualization.
Right. So starting, off at XM Radio, and then it magnified when I went to Homeland. So when all of a sudden Unisys won this contract and I got picked to be that director of network security, I'm 28, 29 years old, having to now design the security for a brand new department and how TSA is going to function from a security perspective. Because in the very beginning, TSA was the data center or the focal point for all of DHS in terms of how the data flew over the wires. So it was the same thing. And now there's people there that I felt were, even at XM, I had a small amount of people that I felt everyone was better than me. Now I've got thousands of people that I feel like are better than me. And so every time getting into that as the new person coming in, not in the C-suite, it was, oh my gosh, all these people are better than me. I better step up my game. I better step up my game. Everywhere I went, I better step up. I better step up. It wasn't until I got to Fixmo and Rick Siegel said to me one day, Dan, you don't have to prove yourself to anyone. You're already here. You've already made it. You've already got the name. And
right.
And then that changed my mentality, is that, oh my gosh, here's guys, because many that don't know, Rick, I mean, he was a big shot at Microsoft for many, many years. He then ran BlackBerry Ventures as their VC, and before he started Fixmo. I mean, he knows tons of people, and he doesn't have an ego about him at all. So he would be the anti of some of the other CEOs that we know. In this case, he truly made it about everyone else, and his ego was about building his team. And he said to me, that when he did that, it changed everything of how I act when I go into a new place. So now, since then, going to Silent Circle, I didn't have I didn't have that same mentality anymore. I was already there. Going over to the bank in Indiana, I didn't have to do that. Coming here, I don't have to. It's now changed in that I can truly look at the environment and see, rather than being in the environment and having to prove outwardly. Now I'm making everyone prove things going in.
Well,
so
I think at the C level, when you start talking about, being the new guy and you're young, I always go back to advice I got that every time I've made a mistake in my life, it's because I never followed this, is walk into the room, stand around metaphorically for 10 minutes and try to figure out who the idiot is. And if you can't, it's you, and adjust your day accordingly. Right, which is some of that imposter. Like, hey, do I belong? And where do I fit? Well, if you look at the organization like a big road, right? When you're in the C level, you're the road, right? And you should be walking in there. Again, you're there. Like, let the ego, let the hubris go, and walk in. And the cracks and the potholes in the road are the things that you don't know. And so what I think you're saying, because it's what I do, and it is, I walk in there and I go, okay, who's going to help me? Who's filling this crack for me? Who's filling this pothole for me? And that's sitting around and observing for 30, 60, whatever is appropriate for that organization. is, I think in part, you're A, trying to figure out who does that. And then B, if there's a hole, if there's a crack that is unfillable in the current organization, from the current organization, you're like, who in my network do I know? Right? When you're a junior guy and you go to the organization, you ostensibly become part of somebody else's network, right? If you're good, right? Because then when that guy moves on, because nobody stays at a company 34, 40 years like my father did at General Electric. Everybody, like you say, you move on. And I said this, I was speaking at an event in Turkey, and we were talking, about it was a leadership thing. Question came up, and I said, look, when you hire, and this was to another CEO who is really gifted, but it's a hard thing when you start bringing in senior people, right? Because I can make a mistake with a network engineer and recover relatively quickly. If I make a mistake with one of the C-level employees, that's a whole different dynamic of, at a minimum, it's going to cost me 6 months to a year severance, because that's what you're going to negotiate, right? But just from the organizational angst that unplugging a big, one of the few out of there who's running a big vertical or two, right? And I said, look, here's the thing. When you hire somebody, you're going to know you made a mistake in a C-level or EVP level if within 3 to 6 months, he's not wanting to bring in people from previous stops, right? Because then you're living what you say, Dan, where you're like, hey, this isn't about me. It's about all my other people. And I'm growing people that are going to grow people. Right. And so, and you and Dan, you and I in particular, because Jason, you weren't in the office every day. We know people that have shown up and like, yeah, I got nothing. Right. I'm trying to build my network. Well, you should have been doing that when you were a high level individual contributor or low level director, not when you're an VP, EVP.
Right.
Right. And I think that right there for me is one of the biggest telling signs when you start talking to executives, walking into an organization, like, okay, this C-level guy right here, who's he brought with him? Who does he want to bring with him? Right, because you can't as a senior executive be dropped into the organization, right? Like, oh, where'd this guy come from? Like, he's a mystery man, and then now he's got no past, right? And I think that bona fides of saying, hey, I got a guy, as I always like to say, is where I grew up, that is hugely important to making any organization better. Because look, Rick, he's got his guys, right? And wherever he goes, he's going to try to get them. And sometimes the answer is, hey, I'm in the middle of a thing right now. I'd love to do it, but I can't. Right. But just know that you're somebody's guy.
Right. I think there's some overlap with academia. In some ways, because you tend to get assigned the same courses, or at least in the same area, based on your own specialty, your expertise, and part of what you're good at. So your expertise in terms of the knowledge, but there's also the expertise in terms of which level of class. Like, for instance, I really like intro classes. Most people don't. I like them because I like getting I have an intro class to the major, and it's freshmen, or it's people from another school in the university that are taking it as an elective. And I like that because I like the intro class dealing with freshmen, getting them excited about the major and so forth and so on, right? Like a gatekeeper.
Or is it, do you like building the foundation?
Both.
Right?
Both.
Because I think that's important, right?
Both. It's a bit of both. Because I don't think you can separate those because of the nature of that class. It's like this class is, the assumption is you don't know shit. You don't even know what
building the foundation.
Yeah, because you don't even know what computer science really is, and I got to get you to a level where you're at least a competent coder, right? In this progression of coder, programmer, computer scientist.
Well, let's be honest, Jason. You do this for ego, right? Because now every professor they have after you is just going to be a letdown. So if you get them first.
Well, yeah, man. Well, there's a strategy to it too, man. And this is where there's some interesting differences too. I will always go first. It's not even a question in my mind. I don't care what it is. I'll go first because either I'll hammer it and good luck following that, or I'll fail, but I was first, so I get leniency. You know what I mean? There's a strategy to it, right? Because nobody's really going to hold the first person to the standard as everybody else.
Write that down.
Yeah, right? I mean, but dude, you've seen me speak. Go ahead and follow that. Good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck. The other part of it too is, so like that, I got to show up and got to do that. And the expectation is I can handle it. But then there's this interesting thing where you're almost like a board member too at the departmental level, because there's all this departmental stuff that has to get handled. And that's more like what you guys are talking about, because at the departmental level, it affects all of us equally, whether you participated in it or not. And so it could go really well based on how we present ourselves as a department and the choices we make. Like whether it's we want to revise a class for next semester, we want to change something, or we just want to try and do something with another department or some service for the university. It has a massive impact on everything. But it's like almost like a board level decision, because nobody has unequal rank at that point, despite what your actual academic rank is, all that jazz. It's a really interesting dynamic.
Well, I also think at that point, where, and this just educationally, my experience is, you get to a point where, the expectation, even, by parents, is that, hey, your freshman year, you're going to have a lot of TAs teaching you and everything like that, because the professors are off doing high-minded things. And I think for kind of reputational integrity, like your freshman shows up and there's a doctor teaching the class as opposed to a guy that's trying to become a doctor. It says, hey, you guys are important. Everything matters, right? Because it's the difference of me or Dan telling someone to go do something, and they go down and tell them, or I walk out of my office, or I get on the phone and I say, hey, where are we at with this? Right. Because you're talking about a sense of, this is really important to the organization because I needed the information directly from you. And you're also building, because now people have I think, greater ownership or engagement for the simple fact that, hey, the big guy's coming down, he wants my opinion. He wants this, or he wants to personally ensure that educationally, in this case, I'm off on the right foot. And I think that in the long run, that's, especially because everyone's new to the computer science game as a major, that it's going to really help reputationally, especially in the area that you're in with all the great schools, people to make a choice to say, hey, I'd like to go there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And for me, it's part of the vision of being this neo-shamanistic role of, you think you want to be this computer scientist, and you have to start somewhere, which is A. And I can tell you where B is, what a computer scientist actually does, and what that role is in the world. How do you get there?
Right.
And man, it's way easier to get lost than it is to end up at B. Like, there's way more ways to get lost along the way than there is to end up at that one place, which is B. And I don't know, man, there's something, I'm sure you guys too have little things that you like to work on, because man, it tickles your fancy, so to speak, right? Well, I like being around the new people and getting them excited about all this crazy stuff that gets them to be.
Right. I think at our very core, the three of us like being educators. We like, in whatever role that is, making people better tomorrow than they were yesterday. And
I would agree.
I think that's, Dan, I think that's why you've had success in leadership roles, and you're going to continue, and why you're going to have success doing what you want, because you don't realize it's not about you. Right, as much as we joke Dan about, it's not about him, and I've said this as his reference on interviews. He's one of the best developers of young talent I've ever seen. Right, because you have to walk in, and yes, you can joke around people, and hey, writing on the board, don't use. I'll never use root on a production server again. I'll never use root on a production server again, and so on and so forth. Right, but when that lesson had to be made, I think I'm glad that it was Dan and I were there to make it, as opposed to somebody that would commit a goof on that person, even though they expected that, because they didn't quite see Dan walking around, joking around about his kingdom and everything like that. But when it came down to this, something was hugely important as a life lesson. If you're going to be in this industry, it was handled with, hey, look, first off, let's fix the problem. Second off, let's remediate and talk about why that's important to do it a different way. And I think that right there is what separates great leaders from good, or good leaders from bad, is how much of this can I make about other people?
Right.
And it's not like you can just say it. People have to feel that, hey, if I've got a problem, I know I can go up to that guy. There's also the benefit of, if people feel comfortable with that, you're going to hear about the effed up things a lot earlier in the process, while they're germinating them before they're full blown.
Well, the big reason why I do all that is in order to have more disciples, so to make it easier as I have put them in all these different places. So when I go to take over the world, it's easy because I've already got them planted everywhere.
Hey, you know what? You're joking, but that at least for me, that's also true, because another reason I like being around the freshmen or the first semester people is I get to pick first.
Yeah.
So I'll quickly sort out, who do I want to work with, or who do I want working on projects that I'm going to end up working on, grants and so forth, and who do I want around me less than I want ball cancer.
Well, I mean, that's a big reason why I did the adjunct teaching, was so that way I got the pick of the interns. So it's funny that you mentioned about the I will not log in as root. I will not log in as root. So I've got these 4 interns, and they are standing up OpenVAS, and I'm having them pick. I was like, all right, see which Linux system is the easiest for the group of you. I walk over, and they're all on different versions of Linux as they're each trying each one out, which is what I told them. All 4 of them are in as root.
Nice.
So I told the story about my
working on a production server in root.
Yeah, about my young apprentice, and I told him, I said, basically it was like in the movie One Crazy Summer. I never ever go in as root. Sudo. And one of them asked, which I'm glad, what's sudo? I said, super user does. That's essentially what it is what, so you always do that because it makes you think, do I really want to do that? Because once you put in the password, it's done. If you do it as root, it's done immediately. If we're doing attack and defend, like if you're going to, because one of the guys is on the CCDC team for his university. I said, if you are always in his root, if you get popped, they owned your box.
Right.
You're done. Everyone's going to destroy it.
Again, it's convenience. Really, it's convenience over over security.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, most of these kids probably have Macs too. It's just the age. So because Macs they're very core Unix-based system. The sudo question pops up a lot, right? You're in there as a not a root user, and so when you want to do certain things, the little box comes up and says, "Please enter your password," right? That's effectively a GUI version of a super user code,
yeah.
Right? And I think it's not. I think the reverse is true with young people that are learning how to code. Is they're going along and they'll enter stuff, and if it requires them to go back and that command won't work, and then they've got to go in and now they've got a sudo. It's like, okay, it should be an alert in their head that I'm about ready to do something that's potentially catastrophic, like RM tac F, right? And it's like, okay, hold on, what are we doing, right? And I think that's a life lesson, right? I think everybody in their life, and especially we talk about being the new guy and moving up the food chain and being new guys, you should have a finely tuned internal sudo mechanism where you see things and you're like, maybe I need to hold on for a second and do some institutional and internal control mechanism on myself, whether it's disciplining people, running in the middle of the room, putting a plan out, or things like that, right? And I think the quicker you can figure that out at that director moving up level and be rational about it, when you get to the C-suite, you're going to have more people that say, hey, I want to go work for that guy. And ultimately, you're going to be successful because you can. Like my chief product officer now, everything I'm either not good at or do not want to do, she is. And she's amazing at it, right? And so I ping stuff off her all the time. I'll be in a meeting and something will happen, and I'll be like, I'll text her. And some of it is all I'm really wanting to do is give that sudo to make sure I'm not crazy, that I'm not ready to make a commitment to do something that we can't do. And I think that's hugely important.
Yeah, well, it's like I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, TK, you and I were talking about this, and I think this is what Dan is now talking about too. Is I'm not going to teach these kids how to program in C, even though that's what the course is. Really, what I'm going to try and teach them, and this is what you're saying, and I think this is where what all of us do completely overlaps, right? Is right now, because of their age and their position in life, they're first order thinkers. Right. What's my immediate need and how do I immediately solve this? And that's why sudo is an inconvenience compared to just logging in as root is more convenient than sudo or something else, right? Whereas what sudo does when it prompts you and what you're talking about is it forces you into a second order thinking and then a third order thinking. And this is what I was just talking about, where once you realize that in most things in life, there are way more ways for shit to go wrong than there is that one way for it to be right based on the goal you've identified. For me, everything makes a hell of a lot more sense.
I agree with that.
If you can start to learn to third or fourth order think out, branching out your decision matrix and forethought, and then getting wise counsel, right? man, you can really eliminate a lot of that stuff by just listening to life's pseudos. See, that's a good dude. You should write a biography, man. Call it Life's Pseudos.
There you go.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Man, because we've been around a lot of people between the three of us, right? And there's a lot of people that don't figure that out. I think a lot of people get to the end of their life and they haven't figured out how to get past second order thinking.
Right. It's very true. It's funny because I'm at the MBA residency a couple of weeks ago, and they're going through and they're teaching people how to properly network. And someone asked the question, does anyone here use any type of software for like your own like CRM, for your network of people? And I said, yeah, I do. And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I just basically use a mind mapping software, and every single person I come in contact with that's new, in my interaction, if I felt like they were worth something, I try to remember 3 things about them. And then I go back to my software, I put it in there, and I put the 3 things in. And eventually I can see very quickly how people will interrelate. And they of course, someone says, well, of course she does. Yeah, I've got notes on all of you, so don't worry about it. Yeah, because I never know when I may need to come across. I said, essentially, I first started off with LinkedIn, and I just downloaded everything from my LinkedIn contacts and I put it into mind mapping, essentially, and I can see all of my network of people. If there's something that I felt was important, a skill that they had, or that they grow, as I see updates on LinkedIn, I add that if I really believed it. I said I put positives, I put negatives. There's also a part of that where I go, I never want to work with these people,
sure,
no matter what. And then there's the group of, if I can ever grab these people, I want to grab them. But I just I use the things that I learned throughout the doctoral program that we were in on how to do research. I expanded that to people.
It's just a pattern of thinking, man. Really.
Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, I wish I had some of that stuff when I was doing intel analysis, because it would have made life a hell of a lot easier back in the mid 2000s.
So let me ask you a question, Dan, because we're both the new guys in this case, and so I'm facing potentially a serious wall at a predetermined point in the future, right? And that's my tenure application. And so there's a certain number of things that have to be done in a certain order, a certain way, on certain milestones between, let's say, now and 3 years from now.
Yeah.
That's a hard block, okay?
Yeah.
So when you sit down and in this idea of you're going to sit around for a certain amount of time and just observe, which I think makes perfect sense, at what point do you start laying out your 1 month, 6 month, 12 month, 24 month, 36 month goals?
So great question. Really, it comes out pretty quickly. But I know coming into an organization, regardless of where they are in the maturity level, I know where the company needs to be in 3 years before I ever walk in the door, because I've already got that information. So I know the what. What I don't know yet is the how. How am I going to get there? And that's where I build, even with my career, with organizations, with products, everything comes back down to a roadmap. And in many ways, it is a 3-year rolling roadmap where my what may change after 1 year, but that's because I've learned more about what the organization is going to need. But I still have a goal in mind what that 3 years is going to be. So I then, every basically day coming in, I reevaluate that what in 3 years, and I start creating different triggers. So I know when we hit this milestone, I better have a plan for that milestone ready to execute. And that can be as simple as the company is growing. If we grow 100 employees in the next year, I better be ready to do this. It could be, I have a cost savings aspect. I have a process improvement. All of these things are coming down, and I put different triggers for what I want to accomplish because I have this 3 years in mind. So for you, example is, you have your 3-year tenure. You need to do X amount of publications. You need to do X amount of committee work. You're probably going to need to do some community service. You may, because you're in North Carolina, have to, kill a couple roosters. I don't know all the different rituals there, but what that is. So if you don't do that every quarter, that you have not made that improvement, you're behind.
Right.
So I do that same thing with the organization. I come in, I know within the first 6 months, I need to have a pretty big win of some type, because that is going to make my life easier for when I have the big ask, because that big ask is going to happen in order for me to meet my 3-year plan. So I need a big win for the organization coming out of my department in order to be able to get it to where I don't have to explain ad nauseum what I need to do next and why. They just now know, oh, you got it. So as an example, I have figured out a way in which I can get out of a small little tiny closet data center into a private cloud and a co-location facility and all this stuff by re-architecting the wide area network, because they went old school and everything is private lines coming in, and it costs $1,900 per month per location. And I can get that down to under $500 per month per location. I can pay for itself. And now all of a sudden I've got backups, I've got replication, I've got recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives. I have brought them into this generation of data center, so to speak. And I did it all without increasing the budget. I did it based on their current. And this is the hardest part for anyone coming into an organization to really do, because they all do iterative thinking, which is basically, your first step of thinking, oh, I just need to do this. Yeah. They don't come in with a mindset that says, how am I going to come in and take every knowledge that I have, design with first principles thinking, and look at this as being blue ocean or greenfield, whatever you want to call it, and go, now based on everything that exists today, how am I going to design this? Well, that's essentially what I did here. SD-WAN is relatively new and it's proven, but not many companies have done it because they've already invested in all this other stuff. Well, I'm going to go with that type of architecture, and I'm going to, because I'm going to have a $300,000 a year cost savings, and at the same time get out of the hardware business and never have to be in it again. And now systems are going to actually be monitored and have backups and test cases for all of that. So that big win I was looking for, and it was through, and I don't necessarily like it, but there was no one else. So as the leader, and this is the part where it comes back and tying it into TK said, you have to be able to have that guy. Well, I need to figure out where my guy needs to be. In order to do that, I have to first get into all the details of everything, design it myself, so that I know who can't really make my vision a reality. And now I go get that guy.
I think really, Dan, what you're talking about is in the military what we call the OODA loop.
Yep. All the time.
Orient or
observe, orient, decide,
act.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the whole theory was first invented by a fighter pilot, and that's how you're making microsecond decisions of where do I have to position this airplane to get a tactical advantage in a dogfight, right? But I think now it's a strategic level thinking as well, right? And when you start talking about the roadmap, there's two different types of roadmaps, right? You have a roadmap to success, right? And a lot of times you can use the NIST framework. You can use a maturity model, and you say, where are we at? And it's very easy to walk into a boardroom, which, by the way, we're going to have another sidebar on that because I found some atrocious, my little research in a very controlled group. How many C-level CEOs invite their CISOs and CIOs to board meetings was absolutely appalling, by the way. But I digress. But so you've got a maturity model roadmap, and that maturity model roadmap, while you want to get to a certain place, as new technologies arrive and things like that, you're going to go, how am I going to accomplish the goal? I want to accomplish that goal with the most efficiency humanly possible. And that's the most manpower efficiency, the most money efficiency, and all the other little things that go into it, right? Whereas when you have a product roadmap, for example, you have to get somewhere, right? And you have to be scalable, predictable, and repeatable to be successful. And if you're those three things, and especially predictable, is the roadmap can become a sales tool. Right? You can start selling the future because it's been proven that you can execute on the now. Right? And that, getting that into an organization, and because especially a young organization where they need money, they need wins, right? To use the term you used, Dan, they need wins. And those wins are in terms of sale. They can be big or small, but you need to start generating a customer base as you build an organization. And the roadmap then becomes also a big shield to save the company from themselves, right? And I think when we were at All Time Circle, one of the big things was, for whatever reason, and I don't want to get into it because again, we'll all need therapy, right? Is that we could not ever make the roadmap that tool for success, right? And Dan, we've experienced this where, hey, if somebody buys this, if one of your sales guys comes in, and by the way, sales guys, if they get a 10% commission, most of them are willing to spend the other 90% to get their 10, right? So, that has to factor into it. Guy, hey, if we do this one thing, and usually it's out of cycle on the roadmap or out of order, somebody will buy $15 million worth. Well, you guys know my response is like, go give me a contract that says that, and then we'll do it. I'm like, well, I don't know if we can do that, Okay, so then the CEO hears about it, or the CFO hears about it, like, hey, man, we got to do this. We got to jump on it. I'm like, that's a maybe. They said if, not like do this and we'll do this.
Right.
If you do this, we'll come back and take another look at it, right? So what having different types of roadmaps in any case does, it allows you to hold it up and say, I got money, people, and time. It's only three things we have, right? Hold it up and then go, what do you want to do differently? Right. And now you slow it. And again, that roadmap to me organizationally becomes that pseudo event where you do that. Right. And we've all experienced where you as if you consider yourself to be the adult in the room, you walk out of the room and it comes back, hey, I got this great idea. And we're fundamentally going to screw the company because I don't have any operational patience. Right. And the great leaders understand, hey, I've got to push on this really hard today because we can't live without this. And then, hey, we need to push on this in the manner in which it needs to be pushed because we need to be considered in our opinion and our action. Right? And that's the bigger difference.
The other part for how I do it in an organization, never try to do too much. A lot of people, when they come into that first, management position or C-suite, they try to boil the ocean. Good luck, right? And I know because of my experience how many real projects you can get done in a year in terms of new. And it's not many. A lot of people think, I can get like 10, 15. No, 2, maybe 3. But in your first couple, your first year or two, you're really only talking about 2 projects that you can really get done that are significant. And when I was at the bank in South Bend, I always said, because of how many problems they had in the beginning, even if you gave me a blank check, I could not solve all of them this year.
Right.
Because I don't have the people, therefore I don't have the time, nor do I have the resources. I have to be able to acquire the people to then be able to have enough time for it to be realized. And then I got to purchase, and acquire the resource. In this case, is typically products, technology, skill set. And in order to be able to do that, since it's new, time is and developing that skill, they go hand in hand. So people try to ask for too much. And I always take pride in that I am less than 2% plus or minus within every budget I have ever been responsible for, because that means I'm only spending exactly what I have to spend.
Dan, here's what I think this is where both of you going through the doctoral process really helps out. What you're doing is you're doing a scientific methodology to fix something, right? If something's wrong and I go, well, if I change two things, if I change multiple things simultaneously and it works, well, okay, which one of those actually worked, right? Yeah. And I think with technology, because a lot of people get enamored with, what like the Forresters and the Gartners and ABS is saying, all those things, and they don't get enamored with it because they're actually looking at the technology. They're enamored with it because I need an endpoint solution, and if that endpoint solution doesn't meet our needs, then I can point to Gartner, and that'll give me some level of measure of cover, right?
Hey, speaking of the endpoint, sorry to interject, but I predict Eric Cole will say in 2020 it's the year of the endpoint.
Oh, Daniel. But I think that's, when you start, you've got to get somewhere, right? You show up, and I think, Dan, I think, in the past, what I've seen is you'll show up with the NIST framework maturity model. I think it's something it might not be perfect all the time, but it's something we can all agree on. And you can come back to it, right? But your biggest I don't know if it's individually in this thing, but I think the CIOs, CISOs, those security professionals, your biggest challenge, and it's the one that I see that needs the most work. And speaking of writing a book, this might be the one, is how to manage up, right? I think that's a huge problem with security. You go in, and the CEOs, who largely are not technologists, even in technology companies, are largely not technologists. They look at their CISO and their CIO, and they go, "We good with regards to network security, right?" And they'll be like, "Yeah." Well, because that's not what you really need, right? Internally with the IT professionals, as it were, what you really mean is, hey, today, given the tools, given our maturity model, given where we're going, and all the threats I know about, and some of the being reactive to some of the ones we don't, we're fairly good today. But most CEOs, C-level folks don't hear that. They hear we're good, right? Instead of managing up and saying, because I was at that thing I did in Indiana for you, Dan, I asked, it's all CISOs and CIOs in the room, and senior IT professionals. I go, how many of you use a maturity model of something that you show the board on a regular basis, or it's an education process with your CEO who's largely not a tech person? And none of them raised their hand. Then I was like, okay, how many of you go to the board meeting and talk about the maturity model? Well, 10 years ago, that wasn't that big a deal. Today, because we all agree that breaches and malfeasance to your network is no longer just an IT problem, right? It's going to get CEOs fired because you're going to basically take away from their mission of increasing shareholder value. When you go and you say to a CEO or you say to a board member who's an investor, okay, what's your tolerance for risk for a breach? What do you get? I get 0, right? And then, okay, now we're in fantasy land.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then you're you have to be ready to defend a position, right? And I think the people that can use an architecture or framework of their choosing, like whether it's the NIST or something else, and go, look, here's where we're at right now, and here's why, right? And I think, Dan, like you say, you're plus or minus 2% on your budgets. What that does is give you the gravitas to actually be able to go get more resources when you need them, because you're not Chicken Little every day of the week saying I need $1 gazillion, right? And you can have the proper discussion to say, okay, look, what are the crown jewels of the company? If I'm not sure that I understand that, which you should be, right? What are the crown jewels of the company? What do we have to defend to the end of the earth, right? And that's we're going to put that. Well, is losing all your customer data and all their PII, or in a healthcare organization, all their PHI, is losing that the same thing as having your website pounded on because you weren't smart enough to put it up in Amazon, follow best practices, and let Amazon solve your problem for you when you start getting whacked, right? And you have to say everything's not a complete catastrophe. And when you get a DDoS attack on your website, how is marketing? How are the outwardly facing communications people going to articulate that in a way that says, hey, this happens all the time. We started from in this 30 seconds after it started happening, we started reacting. This is the world we live in.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about, because the part of the board, the CEO, hey, are we good? You have not just that conversation, but I also get constantly, oh, that's not secure, right? From other people, and I always respond, regardless of are we secure or that's not secure, with according to what, right? What are you trying to protect against? And you have to equate that to, at the board level and to your people, is what capability of the threat actor are we trying to protect against? Are we trying to protect against a nation state attack? Good luck, because we don't have the resources. Are you trying to protect against an organized crime syndicate or hacking organization like an Anonymous or someone like that? Good luck, because we don't have the resources. We're trying to protect against lone wolf hackers, script kiddies, insider threat. That's where we're trying to protect against. And that's how you keep your costs. So if all of a sudden you've told them, if it is an advanced persistent threat from another country, it's going to get in at some time. The industry average is 192 days the adversary has been in your environment before you've detected it. Our goal is to try to get that under 30. And then once it's under 30, under 10 days, under a week, right? And then all that costs money. So when my IT folks and my InfoSec folks say that's not secure, according to what?
Right.
What does secure mean and what does not secure mean? And if the CIO and CISO cannot fundamentally answer those two questions, then go find yourself another CIO and CISO.
Right. You need to go home. Yeah. But I think one of the advantages that, certainly, Dan, somebody like you has is you, by your very nature and what you like to do, you like to teach. And so it doesn't matter whether it's somebody senior to you or junior to you. If you feel somebody doesn't know something, you can do it in a manner that's not offensive, right? And go, hey, look, here's where we're really at, right? And I think more often than not, these CEOs and the board and, C-level people in general, the first time when you come in, especially you're replacing somebody else, right? So that somebody else may or may not have had the same life's experience and given a false sense of what secure really is. And now you can come in, but you're going to do it from not an academic position, but certainly like, here's the model we're going to follow, and this is why. And those good, solid explanations lead to confidence. Right? And that confidence is what you need to, over time on your roadmap, go from, defend against a higher level of actor, right? Mm-hmm. In this case, right? But I think that's across any leadership position. But you have to come in and have credibility, right? I've gone in organizations where, recently I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna hang out. And I've heard all matters of, I know this, I know that. And we've just come out with the fact that, hey, you actually really don't know that, mm-hmm. right? And that's okay. But we have the time to let you work through that. I think in a lot of cases when it comes to network defense is you don't have the time to do that because there's certain basics that you have to address. And with you, Dan, I've got FINRA regulations, I've got SEC regulations, I've got all these things I've got to do. And some of these we can't move on. If that's the case, then we've got to do all hands to go get that fixed. Some things outside of IT, when it comes to leadership and growth, are a lot more fungible.
Oh, it's funny that you say those regulations, because I have this conversation with boards and other executives all the time. They're like, what do you mean we're not good? We just had our last examination from the Federal Reserve, and they came back and they said we have great security controls, and we have PCI certification. And I always kind of chuckle inside, and I say, who else had all of that? And they're like, who? I'm like, every company that was breached.
Right.
So especially now with Equifax, I said they had all that stuff too, right? And guess what? Now we're all foobarred thanks to Equifax. Yeah. And and I say you can either be compliant or you can try to do the right thing and be predictive of where you need to be. If you just want to be compliant, I said, and we did a study when I was at McAfee, this would have been in 2009, that companies that just try to meet compliance standards will spend 2 to 3 times more than they would if they were just trying to be predictive of their cybersecurity posture. And the result of basically trying to be predictive and do the right thing will be compliance.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Well,
Don't fool
there's an old adage that I always like to use. You know, most people in life spend all their time working on appearing to be competent. And if you just show up every day and try to increase your competence, you're going to be a lot better off.
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to be compliant in this case, there's a lot of spinning wheels and we've got bells and whistles. Look, there's a big TV with the thread up there and it all looks like magic, right? When competence is, you know, shows up dressed like hard work a lot, right? And that you don't get there overnight, right? But you know, we live in a world that says, hey, here's a policy, I'm going to follow the policy. Because if I in the outside risk management, and that's ultimately what you're talking about, Dan. You're a risk manager, right? In the ultimate place of assessing risk and mitigating it so that you can function is in the U.S. military, right? If you ever watched a video of somebody doing a tandem bundle, meaning you've got somewhere in the neighborhood, you've got a concrete tube that's 4 feet or 3 feet wide and 4 to 6 feet long, and you stuff 400 pounds of gear in it, you strap it to yourself and jump out of the back of an airplane. If you watch somebody do that for the first time, which I've had senior people come out and go, oh my goodness, I can't believe I let you do that, right? Because we have a big risk mitigation sheet. But we become competent from, we can say TTPs, training, tactics, and procedures. And if you're doing that in your business, I mean, we call it something else because you got to have a civilian name to it, but really you're talking about high level risk mitigation. In your case, or in IT's case, it's about the risk of loss of information, right? And or loss of productivity because now our systems are down because they're pounded, right? But here's the sad thing. I can mitigate all the risk I want in the world, but there's still certain policies I need to adhere to as a leader. If, for example, I go out and do something and I make a rational, on-scene, adult decision that I'm going to do this even though it's against the policy, if we go out and we're highly successful, I'm going to get a big medal, right? And we're going to change the policy because I was an innovative thinker. Well, if I do that, even though it's the right choice, but we lose life, right? One of my guys gets killed. I'm done, right? But on the flip side, if I follow the policy and because of the policy restricting me to certain actions, one of my guys gets killed, they're going to be like, hey, TK, great job following the policy. While we're burying this kid, we're going to go change the policy now so that we got CYA on ourselves. That's where you have to be a little bit more reactive and allow your leaders to make fundamental decisions based on the fact that you trust the fact that they're a professional and that they have the experience to, not jump completely outside of the policy box, but step out far enough to mitigate danger, right? And that's where you're really talking about, am I compliant, right? Or am I trying to be 1 foot forward and take positive action and be a leader effectively, in the smallest word you can say.
Well, I think a lot of it too is how a standard itself is viewed, right? So like what we're talking about, and we have them in, even if you just teaching in a purely academic sense, there's standards.
Right.
And some people, in my experience, look at that as here's the framework within which I'm going to operate, and I'm never going to exceed those bounds, which is kind of like the last scenario you were just talking about. Whereas I think the three of us, certainly speaking for myself, look at us as a standard is two things. A, it's the minimally acceptable behaviors. And B, it allows me to define a boundary system from which I can evolve. And maybe it makes sense because it's so well designed that it never has to evolve. It can exist as is. Or maybe it's just something that later on in my cycle, I need to come back to and say, okay, here's the minimally accepted behavior. Here's what I did. Here's the results. What do I need to do different that may be beyond the standard? And that's okay. A standard shouldn't have to be something that prevents you from moving forward or evolving.
Right. Well, I think when you start talking education, even in bureaucracy, one of my big frustrations about having been a government employee for more than an hour was you can be really innovative in your thought. Well, you get one person in a senior GS-15, that type of role that, as a comptroller, for example, controls all the money. And I've experienced this, right? You just hit the nail on the head. Let's say rules, policies. I can use a policy to say, here's everything that you're allowed to do, right? Here's go at it. Or I can use a policy to always say no.
Right.
to further my agenda or to grind an axe. And I think not all people, because that's a really wildly rough statement, but probably a good number of people that really love working for big bureaucratic organizations. I mean, and the federal government is the gold standard for that, right? But even big Fortune 500 companies, none of us ever want to be employee number 69,455. I'd rather be in the double digits max, right?
Right.
Even if you grow to be a huge company or sell, I want to be in that group of people that can look back and go, I had a hand in making that great, right? But I think there's a comfortability in that if I don't want to be an innovative thinker, right, and I want to get on the dinosaur at 8 and slide off at 5, those policies are my friend, right? And again, I go, why does everybody go to all these trade shows and everything like that? You're trying to find the thing that Gartner said or Forrester or somebody said is good, because now I've got a backstop for what I believe to be a shortcoming, right? And we've talked about this a lot before. When you go to become a senior, when there's a C in your job title, you should be about mitigating your weak points and doing it internally, right? And it might be saying, hey, I'm going to go hire this person because this is just something I'm never going to do again because it makes me crazy. Or fundamentally, I know this needs to be done. I'm not really good at it. And I'm at a point in my life where I just have to go hire somebody that's good at it. But you shouldn't run out in the middle of the room and expose your weaknesses, right? You're an adult. Manage them internally. And the way you usually do that is by either, in Dan's case, we talked about before, he said, hey, I want to know more about the finance piece. I want to go here. I want to go there. So he goes and he gets a quality MBA, right? Well, a lot of the way it manifested is, I just need a guy to do this one thing for me because it's really important, but it's not in the lexicon of shit I'm willing to do anymore.
Right. Right.
There's a lot of stuff I don't want to do anymore.
Right. Let's keep it PG.
Well, it's I'm going to feel really sorry for when I become the CEO of one of these Fortune 500 companies, for that CIO and CISO having to work for me, because it's going to be a tough job.
But that's, it's like right now, like my CPO, I love her to death, but periodically I'm gonna be like, hey, why in God's name are you doing that?
Yeah.
Right? We haven't really gotten there yet, but one of these days, and it's just going to be fundamental of, hey, I thought I was pretty clear in my direction, and I might come back. It's like, hey, you forgot to say that, right? Or you articulate that in a big plan. But I think this goes back to one of the earlier conversations we had about CEOs, and a lot of times they're accidentally a CEO, or when they become a CEO, guys that were CFOs that are become CEOs, and having talked to a bunch of them, and more importantly, talk to their people, I just go, hey, when he's in trouble, or when the organization's in trouble, where does he run, or she? And they run right back to the numbers, right? Because that's their blanket, right? That's their binky that they can go to. And I know a CEO, or he's a leader of a government agency, and he's got a great CIO, great CISO, great chief data officer, but he's built and sold tech companies, and you're not fooling him on the technology. And they're like, it simultaneously is the greatest thing on earth, because when we talk, he gets it, but then it becomes the hardest thing on earth because he wants to challenge the way we do it, because he's an innovator, he's an entrepreneur. He's like, I don't care if we've always done it this way before, go find me a better way to do it, which I think is ultimately great. And turning around and running a state, for example, like you run a business, when he looks at the number of employees in the state and says, okay, why are we on 3 different disparate email systems, right? Because he's used to seeing organizations of, of 250, 300,000 people in these big Fortune 50 companies. He goes, why can't we work like that, right?
Sure.
That comes back to this, it all dovetails back to, hey, I can use the policy to maintain the status quo and move on, get my paycheck, and then leave, and somebody's going to give me a plaque or a watch in 25 years, I'm out. Or I can use those as the baseline for creating a new paradigm. Right? I think that's hugely important. And when one of these days when you show up as a CEO and I'm sitting on your board, because that's what's going to have to happen for me to remain your friend, we're going to laugh about that, right? And I think in a good way, right? And because the vision that we've had and how we talk to people, and I think it all starts with saying, hey, you can be good at startups, but at some point you go and you take over a bigger company. Do you lose that startup mentality that we can change the world? And changing the world in a bigger organization isn't it's not leaps and bounds like it is in a startup where we've got to jump big hurdles quickly to justify justify to the investors what we're doing. Those things, they crunch down as far as noticeable, but you should be at a point that it's more intrinsic where, hey, I know I made a big difference today, and I don't need somebody to come in and slap me on the back and tell me I did that job.
Yeah, I'm still trying to think what the third email system this state is running.
Well, but you know what I mean? It's like it's crazy. It was right, but now they're all in the same thing, and they, like you said, Dan, I've got institutional control over it. It's cloud-based system. I can put my controls on it. I can encrypt it. I can do all the things I need to do, and it's fully interoperable. And that one guy's looking at one thing, right?
What was that email system that IBM used to have? Was it Lotus?
Lotus
Notes, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going. It wouldn't surprise because I'm always fascinated when I go into a company when I was doing more consulting, and they tell me like, and this was even within the last 5 years, and they go, yeah, we just got off of whatever, we're on exchange now. And I'm like, what? I'm like,
right. Yeah, no doubt. But
like today, it's either if you're not using Gmail or Exchange in some fashion, I'm going, what you all are barbarians.
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, but that's like you said, when you go in and you get start doing some consulting, I think it's very easy to walk in and start to assess you do all your research before you go to the company, you show up, you're talking to the CEO, you're talking to whomever, and then you just let them talk, and eventually they're going to confess, right?
Yeah.
Is the thing, because they can't, you're there for a reason. They need help, and eventually they're going to throw themselves on the mercy of the court. What I will say is, if you go in there, for example, in even a medium-sized company, and you get if private equity's in there and they're trying to figure it out, they'll call a guy like me and go, hey, go talk to the CEO, right? And it's a different dynamic, right? And you get to a point where it's after a while, and again, it's learned behavior, learned experience, and you try to impose their situation into your life and go, how would I handle this? It allows you to start asking questions, and then you just have to shut up long enough to let them tell you what makes them cry every day.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Well, no. I think that's spot on in my experience too, even within academia. It's the same process.
Lesson, right? That's a life lesson. And when you start talking about CEO consulting or executive consulting, one of the hardest things is there's no referral system, right? You've got to make friends with certain private equity organizations or VCs, because they'll mandate it to have somebody go in there. Once you get in there, as long as you're not a jackass, you can have a great relationship. But nobody wants to be outwardly, hey, I don't know everything, I had to have help, right? Well, why do you have employees then, right? Because they're there to help. Because if we could do it by ourselves, we wouldn't be there. So I'm just a different guy coming in. But again, it'll be like, well, I said, oh, look, I've had your job, I know it's terrible, right? But you're not helping yourself to make it unterrible, because you won't make these strategic decisions and empower your people to make the organization great, right? And
Right.
the only place I've ever seen this where if you're really good at being the number 2 guy and they elevate you to being the number 1 guy, and if you're terrible at it, because what we do is we let those guys hang around long enough to do either emotional or financial damage to the organization before we're like, oh man, we got to get rid of this guy. We wait for the trend line to start doing this. The only place that if you're bad at being the number 1, that they'll not only take you back at the number 2, but welcome you and overpay you because you were killing it at the number 2 is in the NFL. If you're an offensive or defensive coordinator and you go to be a head coach, if you suck at that, your next job, you're going to get OC and a half money, because now you've got head coaching experience. You can be the associate head coach. I can be the kingmaker. I don't have to be the king. And I think that in business is, what do they call that? The Peter principle, right? Everybody gets to one level above the thing. And there's very few people that are self-aware enough to go, I don't know everything, right? Or it comes down with the king syndrome. The king has spoken, go out and make this happen. If you raise your hand, then you're asking
off with your head.
Yeah, exactly. You're asking your head chopped off, right? And I think today, especially when it comes to tech, a lot of the CEOs that are not tech people, like manufacturing companies, a bank to a certain example, they're a lot more accepting of getting somebody in that at least has a plan, and can articulate that in a non-offensive way, right? Because that's another thing about tech guys is they go in like, oh my God, I can't believe you didn't know that. Well, when does making somebody feel incompetent or feel like a dummy ever helped you advance your agenda? Never.
Right. Right.
Right. And it goes back to the education piece. What do I do when I'm a new guy? I tend to want to walk around and just ask people, hey, what are you doing? Why is this important to you? And more importantly, why is it important to us?
Well, one of the biggest, I think, hallmarks of what you're talking about is I can't, and I've been seriously sitting here trying to think of it while you're talking, while I was listening, is I can't think of one thing in the history of humanity that we would all consider to be a big innovation in any field anyway,
right,
that was done in isolation by a single human being.
Right. No doubt.
There's always a group of people that have at least been a sounding board or a board of advisors, if you want to look at it that way. There's always more than one individual working on something great.
Why do you work on a paper and then send it to somebody else to proofread?
Right.
Because eventually your mind is gonna look at that document and go, you're gonna see what you had meant to write, not what you actually had written. And I'm talking spelling mistakes, grammar, and all the stuff that makes people look silly if they're high-minded and putting out a paper, right? It's why they have editors, right? Because sometimes you need to have your thoughts contained to be more concise. I think that's over time. That was like the hardest thing. Like when I kind of made a jump into consistently being in the C-level now, is how do I be concise with my thoughts to those senior to me in particular, so that they walk away with my intent and kind of whatever I believe to be a guidance for them and helping them out, but also keep it concise enough that they don't have to write it down in a note in their phone to go back and remember it. Right. And I think that is, to me, that was a difficult thing, because I want to explain the whole world to you. Like, there's a problem. Well, back in the day, it started here, and then it did this. And
you were there when it started.
I was. My nickname was Primordial Ooze. That's also my rap name.
The hard part for me as I continue going up the ranks is, and I still transition into this, is that I have a hard time finding people that are more competent than what I am when it came to developing a security program or network infrastructure, systems infrastructure. And that makes it very difficult for me to not continue being more involved in that area. So I've resigned myself as being that I just need, as to what you said, TK, for someone to be able to carry out my intent, the vision that I have, and let them go do it.
So Dan, let me ask you this question. Let me ask you this question with that in light. So you put out your intent, and somebody's going to go start to work on it. If it doesn't end up the way that you imagined it, or with the outcome that you thought, what's your first reaction? Are they messed up, or did I correctly, express my intent? Or because it's going to be some mixture of that, right? Because most people want to turn around to their boss and go, I got it, boss, I'm out, I'm going to go fix it. And when it doesn't happen that way, is it that person is incompetent, or there's some basic level of incompetence there? Or was my vision properly articulated, right? And how do you feel about that?
So it should never have gotten to the end result where I would not have been satisfied with it in the first place. So, a leader is not just going to go, at least to me, go and say, go do it, and then report to me back when it's done. There should have been multiple checkpoints. This way you could have assisted, because I would go back to me and saying, I did not properly express in what my vision was.
That's what I was driving at.
So you have to course correct, and you have to have multiple course corrections.
Right.
Because I have to make a choice. Do I want to do the work, or do I need to be able to spread myself across multiple parts of the organization? So I have to be able to build into my vision, my plan, those checkpoints. And I take it upon myself to go and talk to my people to make sure I don't wait for them to come to me.
Right.
And that's the difference. I'm not reactive, I'm proactive.
I knew that's the whole conversation I wanted, right? Is leadership is an active sport.
Yeah.
Right? And the folks that want to sit back and then, because we've all worked for people that are regal, right?
Yeah.
And, flowing the robes, ball striking, right? But they're just going to sit there and like, hey, I told you to do it.
Yeah, I take leadership. My philosophy around leadership is largely the same policy that we have with our foreign policy. I don't want to fight on home turf. I want to always be the visiting team.
Right.
I want you to feel comfortable in your office, in your domain. I'm going to come to you, be visible.
Right.
And if I have to annihilate you, at least it was done in your own office.
But I also, I think that's a great, that's a great thing. I mean, we used to do this, when I was at Silent Service, it was great because it was a great proving ground because we had a lot of young, smart people that wanted to do great things. And so you could walk in and go, hey, what are you doing right now? Right. And as you both know, it was one of the first times I really tried this out because it was one of the first times I had complete autonomy with most of the organization. And walking into somebody and go, what are you doing to be great today? Right. And at first people are like, that sounds a little bit campy. But what I wanted to do was like, hey, if you're doing whatever we're paying you to do and you're trying to achieve personal greatness along the way, you're going to really, make the organization better. And it took a little while to get hold of. But one day I had one of the really junior people walk in my office and go, TK, what are you doing to be great today? And that's when I knew I had it, because now people in the organization are starting to understand that accountability works both ways. And that as a leader, you have to be accountable to everyone else as well as yourself, right? I can delegate responsibility. I can delegate authority. I can't delegate responsibility, right? But what I can do along the way is make everybody have ownership in what you're doing. And that the other thing is that Pavlovian response is, are you a boss that every time you show up in someone's office is bad, right? All right, oh man, he's back in my office again. I gotta, and now people start to get reticent. You can see it, right? They lean back in their chair, they cross their arms, all the classic signs and symptoms, right? Whereas if you go in and say, hey, we're getting ready to do this, how would you do it? And the younger the person, the better. Because I think when you start talking about, certainly today, people are like, oh, I can't work with millennials, I can't do this. I love them, right? Because money is not an absolute driver for them. Feeling part of the organization and their input matters, and that they can tangibly see it in the output, right? And when I was at Silent Circle, I went and asked one of the guys. He's going to be a CEO of a company someday. He's a really talented guy, and but he wanted to do it tomorrow, right? And he was in a hurry to get somewhere, and that's great. I want people like that, but then it's incumbent on us as leaders to go, I want you to move there faster than anybody else, but you still have to be out on the road driving to get there. You can't just, break the space-time continuum and magically show up, right?
Right.
It's why they don't make 22-year-olds admirals when they graduate from the Naval Academy, right? Because you have to learn the business that you're leading, right? And I went in there and I said, hey, he had great vision about what he wanted to do, but it was through the prism of his front door of his desk, of his office, right? And when we delivered the product, we delivered the thing, he came up to me, he's like, hey, T, if you're going to ask me my opinion, I'd at least like to see some of it in the final product. And I said, well, it's right here. So it's these three things. He goes, okay, I guess, but it just doesn't, and I go, your prism is very narrow. I have the whole field to think about, and I took everybody's input, and this is what we're at. And the more senior you get, the more that visible the input comes. The reason I need you to be where you're at today is because you know how to make the sausage. And I need to see the finished product, but nobody wants to see the sausage, right? They don't want to see the pig get killed, right? And so that's where you're at right now. And that's a great learning curve, but that's how you mature an organization so that it's not defensive all the time when the boss walks in the office and says, hey, we got to chat, right? Because you want it to always be positive, but it's not going to be, because that's how we achieve growth, right? That's, the old adage is like, everybody gets offended now. And probably nowhere is offense more widely used as a mechanism to shut people down than in academia. And when you start at every great advance we've had in humanity starts with dissent, because there's a way that we've always done it, and there's a way we're going to do it differently. I mean, imagine we took sails off ships to depend on steam engines. Can you imagine the discussion with that? Well, the sail is always going to be there. Something to break with the sail. Well, okay, we've got to come up with a method of maintenance, and that dissent is what forces a better answer.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
We've been in organizations together where dissent wasn't welcome. It was like, hey, the meetings were about how are you going to execute the vision that I want, right? Not, and do the dance moves on the way there in the way that I'm telling you to do them, rather than being accountable for your own end result, right? And that's then creating innovative solutions and doing the other things, right? And I think, the companies, like Apple, Steve Jobs, people have their opinions of the guy, but at the end of the day, he put people in a position to be successful. And he, by saying, look, I hire smart people. Bezos does this. I talked to the guy who did the UI UX for the Fire Phone. And, the mapping software on the Fire Phone was what's really innovative. I'm surprised that piece of it has never made its way into something else. But it was super innovative, but it was a very tricky and difficult, we've never done this before, UI UX problem. And I said, so how do you solve it? He goes, we're in a room and we're sitting there and everybody's like scratching their heads and we're like, oh, well, it was me. I don't know if we can do it. Bezos walked in, and this is a leader. And he's like, what's up? What's the problem, gentlemen? And they were in the process of telling him, and he felt, the room was going sideways on him because everybody wanted to throw themselves on the mercy of the court and be off to doing something less than what his vision was. And he said, you know what? He goes, here's the thing. There's a reason I pay you guys a lot of money. It's because I believe in you, because you're extremely smart. And I know that because I don't hire dummies. Now stop feeling sorry for yourself and get out there and be the smart, engaging people you are and go show the world what we can do. Turn around and walk out, because don't sell past the close. That's the difference in what Dan's talking about, where I can go into your office and I can ask you for an idea, but then I can also hold you accountable for the mission once we've agreed to do it.
Right.
All true. And I really, when I try to talk to the people, it is especially when they're not doing it the way I think it should be done, or not getting it to that point. I just ask a ton of questions to get them to where eventually they see, based on their own answers, as to how they weren't right. Because it's easy to tell people they're wrong. Right. But then they're going to be like, my boss is a jerk, right? But if they come to the realization on their own, and that's really the hard part, getting them to realize they're wrong without you having to tell them they were. Because if you have to tell them they were wrong, then it's going to be an uphill battle. And I'm willing to go through that little bit painful exercise, even if it takes multiple times, to have that conversation with them, to let them feel the pain of their decision, as long as it's not going to hurt the organization or hurt their career, right? But I will let them figure out fire is hot if I have to.
Right. But that's, what you're ultimately saying is, hey, I don't want to have to come in and tell you that what you did is wrong. Along the way, I want you to come in and seek counsel, because I present an environment that says, hey, I don't know everything, you don't know everything, but together we can know everything. So if things aren't going well, please come in earlier on and let's have a conversation about it. Right. And I always think everything in life comes back to, do you want to be a great educator? Right. And it's not all in academia, right? We talk about life learning all the time here. And do you want to make people better tomorrow than they were yesterday? And that includes yourself. Right. Yeah. And you talk about kind of the shaman thing. And I think we've talked about some of this before, is, when people go to monk school, which is, there's a guy, Don DePani, I think he's awesome. And he says, hey, they spend up to a year sometimes learning how to breathe, right? Well, what's meditation about, right? When Dan and I were working together at Silent Circle, every Sunday I would go back up to National Harbor and we would go out and eat dinner together, right? Because we're friends. We want to get to know each other more. And so we spend time together, right? And you do that with everybody. Well, why don't you do that with yourself? Right. I think that's a big leadership thing, right? Everybody wants to surround themselves, but at some point you have to be able to sit and have a quiet conversation with yourself, because that's how you get to know anybody better, is by spending time with them. So you have to spend time with yourself. And that is where you get to the point where you're self-aware. And when somebody comes in and they're exasperated because they, in most cases, if you're an effective leader, they don't want to let you down. Right. And so when they walk through the door, how do you treat them? Like, do you treat him like Dan jokes about, like he is, where, he's up on his throne waiting with his sword orb in one hand and scepter in the other? Or are you actually like Dan really is, right? Or that we are, and great leaders are, where you show up and people come in and it's counsel, it's a discussion, right? And that's where I think that's at the it's like right at the intersection of greatness.
No,
Yeah,
I don't have the crown and the throne. This is the same thing I did at Silent Circle. I put the doctoral diploma right next to me. So when people would come in and try to tell me something, I just point over and like, yeah, I already know this stuff.
Yeah, like there's no way. That is so funny. Actually, that's not true. That's not what you did with your doctoral diploma. You put it over a hole in the wall. It became persistent.
Yeah. No, that's after I took over Toby's office, because you eat what you kill. And the office that next to it, where it had that pillar before that.
Oh yeah.
But to wrap this up, I think you're right, and I think you would agree that often the people that tyrannize those around them are also the people that foremost are tyrannizing themselves with their own thoughts. Yep. Instead of often people like you and Dan, in my experience, that engage in really what is a classic Socratic dialogue of, Dan, you portray this image of leading somebody to understand where they were wrong, but I also know you well enough to know that you're open-minded enough to know in that process you might discover that you were wrong. Yeah. And that is this idea of let's agree on objective common truth as we can derive it. But once we agree on it, now we're going to hold each other maybe unequally because of the hierarchical structure to responsible for achieving what that truth is that we've agreed upon. And that's a much more successful system. I mean, look at history. Tyrannies don't last.
No doubt.
Absolutely. And I always ask people this question, especially when they say they want to be a leader. And I can really find out a lot about them very quickly, depending on how they answer this question, which is, would you rather be right and lose or wrong and win? Right. I want to be wrong and win every day. Don't care. But I know of several, people who say they're leaders, they have to be right, even if it means they lose.
Sure. Well, this is the beautiful thing of asking questions. You can never be wrong, right? As long as you're just asking questions and you're sincere in that attempt to reach this objective truth, how can you ever be wrong?
Right. I mean, with one of the companies that we're with now, the guys over in Kosovo, there's a lot of unbelievably smart, gifted dudes. And the funny thing is, I'll make suggestions, right? We were going to do this big monolith design for something we're doing. And I was like, no. Because I was looking at, all I looked at is what the project plan or the product plan said we were going to spend annually on Amazon. And I'm like, that's insane on AWS, right? And when I looked at it, I'm like, oh, now I get why. And I challenged them to do things a different way. I didn't tell them what to do. I said, hey, think like this. And I used another company's name how it moves a lot of data back and forth. And what they found out was that the company's algorithms for how they handle data and kind of to stop it from piling up at any one point that goes down, all of those algorithms and all of those API kits are all open source and they're available on a Git tree, right? And they're like, man, this is, and I knew that, but by the same token, there's no value in walking in the middle of the room and saying, hey, do it my way, right?
Right.
If you have really smart people and they want to do really innovative things, sometimes all you need to do is give them a hint, because now they did it. They did an amazing job, right? I knew what I wanted at the top level, and they came down and the plan I got was amazing, right? And they're all excited and they're doing great things. In fact, I went out to Dan. I went out and got Stoney. He built the network, built the architecture for us, and his comment was, he goes, I'm happy. This is the first time you didn't bring me in after everything was messed up, so I didn't have to fix it. Right? So he got to build it all. It's also the time where I showed up at day one, right? And so he was really happy because literally, I gave him the mechanism, to go out and literally start our Amazon account. Right. So he was starting from ground zero. And so he built this pristine chalice of a workspace for us. And the great part about Stoney, as you know, is he's also teaching folks along the way that work for the company so that he doesn't have to be here forever. Right. He's building this for us on his off time. He's got the environment, and now we have him on 5 hours a week. And it's maintenance. And it's also, these guys feel comfortable calling him because he gives great advice and he does it in a very soothing manner. And so we've increased our success by bringing one guy on 5 hours a week.
Well, it's probably true he's not going to be there forever, because one of those days that fine corn liquor he makes in the bathtub is going to kill him.
There's no. He's well. We'll know because he's gonna go blind first.
Yeah.
And then he'll be on his way to die. So, seeing eye dog for his braille keyboard, we're gonna know.
He's like, he's always like, Dad, this is some fine corn liquor. I'm like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. That shit is garbage.
Well,
You know what? Actually, there's one thing that his fine corn liquor is better than, and that's that nasty proper 12
yeah.
that Conor McGregor puts out. Proper 12 is worse than that fine corn liquor that Stoney makes in his bathtub.
Here's the funny thing. The European guys, they're not like Southern accents, whatever, doesn't mean anything to them. The thing I love about Stoney, and has nothing to do with him, right, is he's got a really deep Southern accent. And so when you start getting around technology folks and everything, there's a certain level of arrogance, and that's how people judge. And then he shows up and he starts talking with his deep Southern accent, and people think he's a dummy. And then all of a sudden you start working, and they're like, I might want to sit down and listen. And maybe if I learn this accent, I can be as smart as he is, right? And I think that's a magic. When I like bringing him in, especially to U.S. organizations, when I'm part of one, is to bring him in and just watch folks around the table internally, because their mouths will curl up, and they're get a little wrinkle because they're trying not to laugh because they think, they're like, TK brought in some dummy. I'm like, everybody just wait.
Well, that's exactly what happened at Silent Circle. Everyone that talked to him said, nah, not a good fit, not a good fit, not a good fit. And I'm going, there's no way TK is going to bring someone here that wouldn't know what they're doing.
Right.
So I went and had a conversation with them, and I'm like, in 5 minutes, I went, all right, I now know the people that need to leave the company so I can bring this guy in, because they're going to make it difficult for him, and Stoney knows what he's doing.
Right.
So,
remember we had the denial of service tag that day? Stoney was like a dog on a leash, just wanting to get at it, because he's like, I can fix this in 3 minutes. And you rightfully did against probably what was, from an emotional standpoint, you wanted to be like, you three, get out of here right now. You did the right thing from a technical leadership standpoint of, hey, if they're not making the problem worse, let them work on it.
Yeah.
But Stoney's looking at it, and he's like, they didn't do these 4 things when they set it up. This is why we're having this problem right now. And as soon as we took him off the leash, he did those 4 things, and our problem stopped.
Yep.
Right? It was that simple. And so much so that a lot of those guys that were making fun of him when he showed up day one, not the 2 leaders, but the guys under them were calling Stoney and Clint all the time to ask them for help. Right. Yeah. And so much so that one of the guys got each one of them $100 Amazon gift card because he was so thankful. He's like, I wouldn't have figured this out in 90 days. You guys figured it out in 90 minutes. Right. And that's, you have to let go of your hubris at some point in your life. And I'm better than everybody else. And certain people don't. And we'll goof on them until we die.
Yeah. Not everyone can be me.
Right, exactly. See, he let go of his hubris a long time ago.
No, I'm not great at everything.
Well, guys, I got a brunch date with Mrs. Pittman because we're kidless today.
Nice.
Get after that, dude.
And
Is that a Barry White brunch? Is that a Barry White brunch date, or are we actually going to go out and eat?
Oh, no. We're going to go somewhere. I don't know where, if it's Waffle House, IHOP, or I'm a Yankee in the South, man. I just
nothing but the best for her, right?
Yeah, that's right. Waffle House.
I can't remember the scene.
I'm surprised. I'm going to Sizzler.
Oh my goodness! I think I just got sick. I just got ill. I don't eat that much red meat anymore anyway. So when I do, I want it grass-fed, dry-aged, and I want to enjoy it because it's going to be a much smaller portion than I ate when I was 25. And I just want everybody to be quiet while I'm in my zone.
Yeah.
And we wonder why the guys over in Kosovo were beating around the bush, but it came back to, why are there so many fat people in the U.S.? Like, well, in Pristina, we walk everywhere, right? I mean, it's a 10-minute walk. You go, it's 10 minutes, right? And guess what? Along the way, when you're with 2 or 3 people, you're getting to know somebody better. Mm-hmm. I said, but you're also moving. And it says portion control. I said, we are buffet goers, right? Restaurants take pride in the fact that when they deliver food to you, it's probably more than you can eat because they don't want to be known as someplace you walk out of being hungry. All right. And
as a culture, we fundamentally fail at understanding how to deal with our own prosperity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You have to take ownership of you.
Yep.
All true.
All right,
my
guys.
friend.
Hey, real quick, one important note. Next Sunday, I am not available. I will be in Ohio.
They don't have internet in Ohio?
Dan, look, we went right with the same thing. It's like I don't have internet in Ohio.
Not to the part I'm going to.
Really?
No, they do. But
Circle
fuck
that
off.
on the map, so circle that on the map, so I never go.
But
All right. Sounds good.
but I'll let you know if I'm available when I'm available after that.
Okay,
Hey, I might be available during the week here. So if you are, let me know.
I'll text you guys.
all right, man. Cool. Thanks.
All
All right,
right.
everybody. Have a good
week,
weekend.
everyone.
Cheers.
Peace.
Bye bye.